On my birthday, my family threw me a party, just to get me to sign away $12 million. I smiled and played a video. Having you here listening to me means a lot. Watch until the end and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I'm really curious to see how far my story is reaching. I stared at the invitation in my hand, unable to believe what I was seeing. My family, the same people who had forgotten my birthday for the past 5 years, had organized a surprise celebration at my father's estate. The ornate card, embossed with golden letters, felt heavy in my hands, almost as if it carried the weight of their sudden, inexplicable change of heart. At 32, I had long accepted my position as the family disappointment. The black sheep. The one who dared to build her own path instead of following in my father's footsteps at Blackwell Industries. "Are you really going?" asked my roommate Jess, peering over my shoulder at the invitation. I could hear the concern in her voice. She'd been there through all the holidays I spent alone, all the achievements my family never acknowledged. "I have to," I replied, running my finger along the edge of the card. Something's off. This isn't like them. And it wasn't. My father, Richard Blackwell, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, had made it abundantly clear that I was a disappointment the day I turned down his offer to join the family business. My brother, Matthew, had gladly stepped into the role of the dutiful heir, shadowing my father's every move, adopting his ruthless business tactics, his cold demeanor. My mother, once warm and loving, had gradually retreated into the background, choosing silence over defending me. The night of the party, I pulled up to my childhood home, a sprawling mansion that had always felt more like a museum than a place where people actually lived. Every window was lit up, and I could hear laughter spilling from the open doors. For a moment, I was transported back to when I was a little girl, still believing I belonged in this family. "Emily." My mother rushed toward me as I entered, air kissing both my cheeks, her designer dress rustling. "You look nice." Her eyes briefly scanned my simple black dress, nowhere near the caliber of clothing that was acceptable in the Blackwell household. "Thanks, Mom," I said, trying to ignore the faint disappointment in her eyes. The grand living room was filled with familiar faces, business associates, distant relatives, and a few family friends who had watched me grow up. Matthew stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, talking animatedly to our father's lawyer, Mr. Peterson. They both glanced my way, a strange look passing between them. "The guest of honor has arrived." My father's booming voice cut through the chatter as he approached with open arms. Everything about him was immaculate: his custom suit, his perfectly groomed silver hair, his practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. Something was definitely wrong. My father hadn't hugged me in over a decade. "Happy birthday, Princess," he said, using a nickname he'd abandoned when I was 12. "We have something special planned for you tonight." Throughout dinner, I watched as my family performed an elaborate charade of affection. Matthew recounted childhood memories that seemed rewritten to include me. My mother asked about my job as a financial consultant, a career she had previously dismissed as playing with other people's pocket change. My father kept refilling my wine glass, his smile growing wider with each pour. After dessert, my father tapped his glass with a spoon. "As you all know, we're here to celebrate my daughter's 32nd birthday." He gestured toward me. "Emily has always been independent, strong-willed. But tonight, I want to welcome her back into the family fold properly." Mr. Peterson stepped forward, placing a leather portfolio on the table in front of me. "These are just some routine documents, Emily," he explained smoothly. "Your father wants to include you in the family trust. It's quite generous." I opened the portfolio, scanning the dense legal text. Years of working in finance had taught me to read between the lines, to spot the traps hidden in footnotes and subclauses. And there it was, buried in legal jargon. I wasn't being included in anything. I was being tricked into signing away my rightful inheritance, roughly $12 million that my grandmother had specifically left to me in her will, which I'd never been told about. My hands trembled, but not from shock or hurt. From anger. I looked up, meeting my father's expectant gaze, my brother's barely concealed smirk, my mother's averted eyes. "Is there a problem?" my father asked, his voice hardening slightly. I smiled, a real smile, not the forced one I'd been wearing all night. "No problem at all," I said, reaching for my phone. "But before I sign, I'd like to share something with everyone." I pressed play on the video I'd recorded just 3 days earlier, a conversation between my father and brother in my father's study, where they had discussed, in detail, how they would trick me into signing away my inheritance at this very party. The blood drained from my father's face as his own voice filled the suddenly silent room. I'd always known I was different from the rest of my family. It wasn't something they let me forget. Growing up as a Blackwell meant being groomed for greatness, specifically, for Blackwell Industries. My father, Richard, had inherited the company from his father, who had built it from the ground up during the economic boom of the 1970s. By the time I was born, we were firmly entrenched in the upper echelons of society, with all the privileges and expectations that came with it. Matthew, my older brother by 4 years, had embraced the Blackwell legacy from an early age. I still remember him at 7 years old, wearing a miniature suit to take your child to work day, his small hand clutching a briefcase filled with crayon drawings of what he thought were business plans. My father had beamed with pride, showing him off to every executive they encountered. I, on the other hand, was always asking questions. Why did we need so much money? Why couldn't Dad come to my soccer games? Why did Mom seem so unhappy despite our beautiful house and expensive things? Your sister just doesn't understand how the world works, I'd overheard my father telling Matthew when I was 9. She's too soft. Too idealistic. By 16, the divide had grown even wider. While Matthew was interning at the company, I was volunteering at a local financial literacy program for low-income families. I discovered I had a knack for numbers, but more importantly, for explaining complex financial concepts to people who hadn't had the advantages I'd grown up with. "It's a nice hobby, Emily," my mother had said dismissively. "But it's not a career." The final break came during my senior year at Princeton. I'd been studying finance, partly to please my parents, but I developed my own philosophy about money and its purpose. When my father presented me with a detailed 5-year plan for my entry and advancement within Blackwell Industries, I declined. The look on his face that day had been one of complete disbelief, followed quickly by cold fury. "After everything we've given you," he'd said, his voice dangerously quiet, "this is how you repay us? By rejecting your birthright?" "It's not my birthright, Dad," I'd replied. "It's a choice. And I'm choosing a different path." I tried to explain my vision, working as a financial consultant for small businesses and individuals, helping people build security and wealth on their own terms. But he couldn't hear me through his disappointment. That was the day I became invisible in my own family. After graduation, I moved to a small apartment in the city and started building my practice. The first few years were lean. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, doubting my decision, missing the family I'd lost. My calls home went unreturned. Birthday cards I sent came back unopened. I was invited to Christmas only once, a disaster where I spent the entire day being either ignored or subjected to passive-aggressive comments about my cute little business. Meanwhile, Matthew flourished under our father's mentorship. By 30, he was COO of Blackwell Industries, featured in business magazines as a rising star. Our mother hosted galas and charity events, playing the role of corporate wife and society matron to perfection. From the outside, the Blackwells were the picture of success. What nobody saw was the ruthlessness behind that success. I'd heard rumors over the years, about suppliers strong-armed into unfavorable contracts, about employees fired just before their stock options vested, about environmental regulations circumvented through legal loopholes and well-placed political donations. The only family member who had ever shown me genuine love was my grandmother, Eleanor. My father's mother had been a force of nature, brilliant, compassionate, and fiercely independent herself. She'd built the initial fortune that had allowed my grandfather to start Blackwell Industries, though that fact had been carefully erased from the company's official history. "You remind me of myself, Emily," she'd told me during one of our secret lunches, after I'd been excommunicated from the family. "Never let them dim your light." She died 2 years ago. I wasn't invited to the funeral. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Grandma Eleanor had left me a significant portion of her personal fortune in her will. Money that was separate from the company, money that was rightfully mine. Approximately $12 million that my father had somehow managed to keep hidden from me. I discovered this purely by accident, through an old family friend who'd reached out to express belated condolences. Eleanor would have been so upset to see how they're handling her bequest to you, he'd mentioned casually. When I pressed for details, he seemed confused. The trust fund? The one that matures on your 32nd birthday? She set it up years ago. That conversation was exactly 1 month before the surprise birthday invitation arrived. 1 month of investigation, of carefully cultivating contacts, of piecing together the truth. 1 month of growing anger as I realized the extent of my family's betrayal. I hadn't just been excluded from family gatherings. I'd been deliberately kept in the dark about an inheritance that was legally mine. And now, as my 32nd birthday approached, the day the trust would mature and I could claim it, they had hatched a plan to trick me into signing it away. 3 days before the party, I'd received a tip from an administrative assistant at my father's company, someone who'd always been kind to me during my childhood visits to the office. She told me my father and brother were having a private meeting that afternoon. She could leave the door to the adjacent conference room unlocked if I was interested. I hadn't planned to make a recording. I just wanted confirmation of my suspicions. But when I heard them discussing, in explicit detail, how they would manipulate me emotionally at the party, how they would use my desire for family reconciliation against me, how they would trick me into signing away my inheritance without ever telling me it existed, my hands had moved almost automatically to start the recording on my phone. Emily's always been naive, my brother had laughed. She'll be so desperate for your approval, Dad, she'll sign whatever we put in front of her. Just make sure she doesn't actually read the documents, my father had replied. Peterson has buried the relevant clauses deep enough, but she's always been too curious for her own good. As I stood in my childhood home, watching my father's face drain of color while his own voice exposed his treachery to the assembled guests, I felt no satisfaction. Only a profound sadness for what could have been, and fierce determination for what would come next. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice shifting from shock to rage as the recording continued to play. In the video, his voice was unmistakable. "Once she signs, we'll have complete control. She'll never know about Eleanor's trust fund." Matthew's voice followed, "and we can finally stop worrying about her causing problems for the company." "Dad, you should have done this years ago." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some averted their eyes, while others watched in horrified fascination. Mr. Peterson, the family lawyer, quickly closed his portfolio and began inching toward the exit. "Turn that off," my father commanded, but his usual authority had evaporated. "This is a private family matter." I paused the recording but kept my phone firmly in my hand. "Is it private, Dad? Like Grandma Eleanor's will was private? Like the trust fund you hid from me was private?" My mother stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hands fluttering nervously. "Emily, darling, you're misunderstanding. Your father was only trying to protect you. You've never been good with large sums of money, Anne." "Mom, stop." My voice was steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'm a financial consultant. I manage millions of dollars for my clients every day." "For strangers," Matthew interjected, attempting to regain control of the situation. "This is different. This is family money. Blackwell money." "No," I countered. "This is Grandma Eleanor's money. Money she specifically left to me, not to Blackwell Industries." The room fell silent. My father's jaw tightened as he realized I knew more than they'd anticipated. He glanced at Mr. Peterson, who had stopped his retreat and was now typing furiously on his phone. "How did you find out?" my father finally asked, his voice unnaturally calm. "Does it matter?" I replied. "What do you want?" Matthew demanded, abandoning all pretense of brotherly affection. "Money? A position in the company? Just name your price." I looked at my brother, truly looked at him, and saw the stranger he'd become. Or perhaps had always been. His handsome face was contorted with a mixture of panic and calculation. He was already trying to figure out how to contain the damage, how to spin this story, how to buy me off. "I want what's rightfully mine," I said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." "We can discuss this privately," my father insisted, gesturing toward his study. "There's no need to air family business in front of everyone." I glanced around the room. Most of the guests were my father's business associates and their spouses, people who had watched me grow up, who had witnessed my gradual exclusion from the family, who had said nothing. They weren't innocent bystanders. "I think we're past private discussions, Dad." As if on cue, the front door opened, and a woman in a sharp gray suit walked in. Marianne Torres, the lawyer I'd hired after discovering the truth about my inheritance. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, striding confidently into the dining room. Traffic was terrible. She handed me a slim folder. "Everything's ready, Emily." Matthew's face flushed red. "Who the hell is this?" "Security," he shouted, though we all knew there was no security present. This was supposed to be a family birthday party, not a corporate event. Marianne introduced herself, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Ms. Blackwell's attorney. And I have some documents that require immediate attention." She turned to Mr. Peterson. "I believe you're familiar with the Eleanor Blackwell Trust? The one that matures today?" Peterson's face went pale. He glanced at my father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Yes," Peterson admitted reluctantly. "But there are complications." "No complications," Marianne interrupted. "Just an attempt to defraud my client of her rightful inheritance." She placed another document on the table. "This is a court order freezing all assets related to the trust until the matter is resolved." My father's face hardened into a mask of cold fury I recognized from childhood, the look that had once terrified me into silence, into compliance. But I wasn't a child anymore. "You've been planning this," he accused, his voice dangerously low. "All this time, pretending to be estranged, you've been plotting against your own family." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound that surprised even me. "That's rich coming from you, Dad. I found out about this trust 1 month ago." "1 month? You've been hiding it from me for years." "We gave you everything," my mother interjected tearfully. "The best schools, the best opportunities. And you threw it all away." "You gave me everything except what I actually needed," I replied, a lifetime of unspoken pain surfacing in my voice. Acceptance. Support. Love that didn't come with conditions. The room fell silent again, the weight of years of familial dysfunction hanging in the air. Someone's champagne glass clinked as they set it down too hard. A clock ticked somewhere in the background, marking the seconds of this family implosion. Then, unexpectedly, a voice spoke from the doorway. "I think I've heard enough." We all turned to see Uncle James, my father's younger brother, the black sheep of his generation, who had left the family business decades ago to become an environmental lawyer. He'd been on the periphery of my childhood, appearing occasionally at holidays with wild stories of his travels and legal battles before disappearing again. "James," my father acknowledged coldly. "I didn't think you were coming." "I almost didn't," Uncle James replied, his gaze finding mine. "But I'm glad I did." Uncle James walked further into the room, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere. Unlike my father with his rigid posture and custom suits, Uncle James carried himself with a relaxed confidence. His salt and pepper hair was slightly too long, and his blazer looked like it had been hastily thrown over a casual shirt. He didn't fit in with the polished Blackwell image, and had never tried to. "This party seems to have taken an interesting turn," he observed, picking up a half-empty champagne glass from a nearby table. My father stepped forward, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "This is a family matter, James. Your input isn't needed." "On the contrary," Uncle James replied, his voice light but his eyes serious. "I think my input is exactly what's needed right now." He turned to the guests, who were watching the drama unfold with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but I believe the celebration is over. Would you mind giving the Blackwell family some privacy?" To my surprise, people began to gather their belongings and file out, murmuring apologies and goodbyes. Even in a room full of powerful business executives, Uncle James's quiet authority carried weight. As the last guest departed, my mother collapsed into a chair, her perfect composure finally cracking. "How could you do this to us, Emily? On your birthday, of all days?" "I didn't do this," I replied steadily. "I just refused to be the victim." Matthew sneered. "Always the martyr. Always so self-righteous." "Enough," Uncle James interrupted. "Matthew, be quiet. Helena, compose yourself." He turned to my father. "Richard, I think it's time you explained why you tried to steal from your own daughter." My father's face flushed with anger. "I don't answer to you, James. I never have." "No, but you might have to answer to the SEC," Uncle James replied calmly. A deathly silence fell over the room. Mr. Peterson, who had been quietly conferring with my father, looked up sharply. "What are you talking about?" my father demanded. Uncle James walked over to where I stood and placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Emily contacted me 3 weeks ago after she discovered the trust. She was confused, hurt, and looking for answers. So I helped her get them." I hadn't planned to reveal Uncle James's involvement so soon, but now that it was out in the open, I felt a surprising relief. After discovering the trust and hiring Marianne, I'd reached out to Uncle James, remembering how he'd always been kind to me as a child. I'd expected advice, maybe moral support. What I'd gotten was so much more. "Your father isn't just trying to steal your inheritance, Emily," Uncle James continued. "He's trying to hide evidence. The Eleanor Blackwell Trust was set up with very specific conditions Richard has been violating for years." My lawyer, Marianne, stepped forward, opening another folder. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwell established the trust with a significant portion of her personal fortune. She specified that the money should go to Emily on her 32nd birthday, but with an important provision. If Emily chose to invest the money in Blackwell Industries, she would receive voting rights proportional to her investment. Grandma wanted to ensure I had a voice in the company, if I wanted one, I added, the realization dawning on me fully for the first time. She hadn't just left me money, she'd left me power. "But there's more," Uncle James said grimly. Eleanor also included a clause requiring an independent audit of Blackwell Industries' environmental compliance and labor practices before any of her money could be used to purchase shares. My father's face had gone from red to ashen. "She had no right." "She had every right," Uncle James cut him off. "It was her money, her legacy. And based on what my investigators have found, you've been deliberately hiding this trust from Emily because you knew an audit would reveal serious violations." Matthew stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're bluffing. You have nothing." "The Heartland River Project," I said quietly, watching my brother's confidence falter. "The manufacturing plant in Arizona. The overseas factories. We have documentation on all of them." Over the past 3 weeks, Uncle James had connected me with former employees, environmental experts, and financial analysts. Together, they had uncovered a pattern of violations that could result in millions in fines and potential criminal charges. My father and brother hadn't just been cutting corners, they'd been knowingly endangering people's health and safety for profit. "This is absurd," my father sputtered, but the panic in his eyes told a different story. "Peterson, tell them they have nothing." The lawyer seemed to shrink under my father's gaze. "Mr. Blackwell, I think, given the circumstances, we should perhaps consider our options carefully." "Options?" Matthew exploded. "There are no options. This is blackmail." "No," Marianne corrected coolly. "This is legal recourse. My client has the right to claim her inheritance and to ensure that the conditions of the trust are met." "What do you want?" my father finally asked, directing the question at me rather than Uncle James or Marianne. His voice was different now, not the commanding tone he typically used with me, but something almost desperate. For a moment, I was transported back to childhood, to all the times I'd sought his approval and been denied. To all the times I'd tried to voice concerns about the company's practices and been dismissed. To the day I'd walked away from Blackwell Industries and, consequently, from my family. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I want what's mine. And I want accountability. If you go public with this, you'll destroy everything, my mother pleaded. The company, our reputation, your brother's future. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear for me or what had almost been done to me, but fear of losing status, of losing the life she'd become accustomed to. I'm not looking to destroy anything, Mom, I said softly. But I won't be silent anymore. Uncle James squeezed my shoulder in silent support, while Marianne watched the exchange with professional detachment. Mr. Peterson was typing frantically on his phone again, probably reaching out to the army of lawyers Blackwell Industries kept on retainer. My father and brother exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, calculation, panic, and the dawning realization that they were no longer in control of the narrative. For the first time in my life, I held the power in my relationship with my family. And I knew exactly what I planned to do with it. The Blackwell family estate had never felt so small. The five of us, my parents, Matthew, Uncle James, and myself, sat in my father's study, the same room where I'd recorded his betrayal just days earlier. Marianne stood by the door, while Mr. Peterson nervously shuffled papers at my father's desk. Let's be reasonable, my father began, his voice calmer now that the initial shock had passed. He'd always been good at adapting, at finding new angles of attack when the first approach failed. We can settle this privately. No need for courts, for public scrutiny. I agree, I replied, surprising everyone in the room, including Marianne, who raised an eyebrow. I have no interest in publicly humiliating this family. Matthew scoffed. How generous of you. I ignored him and continued. But private resolution doesn't mean sweeping everything under the rug. It means accountability, transparency, and change. What exactly are you proposing? My father asked, leaning forward slightly. I looked to Marianne, who nodded and stepped forward, placing a document on the desk. Ms. Blackwell proposes the following, she began in her clear, precise voice. First, immediate transfer of the full $12 million trust fund to her control, as stipulated in Eleanor Blackwell's will. Second, a comprehensive internal audit of Blackwell Industries' environmental and labor practices, with results to be reviewed by an independent committee. My father's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Third, Marianne continued, implementation of whatever changes this committee deems necessary to bring the company into full compliance with all regulations. Fourth, a fund to be established for remediation of any environmental damage and compensation for affected communities. This is extortion, Matthew snapped, standing abruptly. You have no right to dictate how we run our company. Sit down, Matthew, my father commanded, his eyes never leaving mine. Let's hear the rest. There's one more thing, I said, taking over from Marianne. I want a seat on the board. Not as a figurehead, but as an equal member with full voting rights. The request hung in the air, landing like a grenade in the center of the room. My mother gasped softly. Matthew's face contorted with fury. And my father, he did something I hadn't seen since I was a child. He laughed. You, he said when his laughter subsided. On the board? You, who walked away from this company. Who spent years criticizing everything we stand for. Exactly, I replied, refusing to be intimidated. That's precisely why I should be there. The board needs a different perspective. Someone who will ask the hard questions, who will push back when necessary. This is about more than just your inheritance now, Uncle James interjected, his voice gentle but firm. It's about the kind of company Blackwell Industries will be moving forward. My father's laughter faded, replaced by the calculating look I knew all too well. He was weighing options, running scenarios, looking for leverage. And if we refuse? He finally asked. Marianne stepped forward again. Then we proceed with legal action. The trust fund case is straightforward. You've hidden an inheritance from its rightful beneficiary. But more concerning for you would be the regulatory investigations that would follow once we present evidence of environmental violations to the appropriate agencies. My father turned to Mr. Peterson. Options? The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. From a purely legal standpoint, sir, fighting the trust fund claim would be challenging. As for the other matters, exposure could lead to significant fines, possible criminal charges, and substantial damage to the company's stock value. There's also the matter of public opinion, Uncle James added. The story of a father and son conspiring to defraud a daughter of her inheritance while covering up corporate malfeasance, well, it doesn't play well in the press. The room fell silent again as my father considered his position. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes, weighing the cost of giving me what I wanted against the risk of losing much more if he refused. I need time to consider, he finally said. You have until tomorrow morning, I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. I've given you 3 weeks more than you deserve, the time between discovering your plan and tonight. Matthew stood again, pointing an accusatory finger at me. You come in here, threaten us, make demands, and expect us to just roll over? Who do you think you are? I'm a Blackwell, I answered simply. Just not the kind you expected me to be. For the first time that evening, I saw a flicker of something like respect in my father's eyes. It wasn't warm or loving, Richard Blackwell had never been capable of that kind of affection, but it was acknowledgement. Tomorrow morning, then, he agreed. Peterson, draft the necessary paperwork for both scenarios. We'll decide which route to take by then. As we prepared to leave, my mother approached me for the first time since her initial outburst. Her perfect makeup couldn't quite hide the fatigue in her eyes. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. Tearing the family apart like this? I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a wave of sadness. You're asking the wrong question, Mom. The family was already torn apart. You all made that choice years ago when you decided I didn't fit your vision of what a Blackwell should be. She flinched as if I'd struck her. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I replied, keeping my voice gentle despite the hurt bubbling beneath the surface. And the saddest part is, you've never even realized what you lost. I turned and walked away, Uncle James and Marianne falling into step beside me. As we reached the foyer, I paused to look back at the grand staircase I'd slid down as a child, the chandelier my mother had been so proud of, the family portraits that tracked my gradual exclusion from the inner circle. Are you all right? Uncle James asked softly. No, I answered honestly. But I will be. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. The weight of the confrontation still pressed on my chest, but beneath it was something else, a sense of standing on solid ground for the first time in years. Do you think they'll agree? Marianne asked as we walked toward our cars. I considered the question, thinking about my father's calculating eyes, my brother's fury, my mother's confusion. Yes, I said finally. My father cares about 2 things, his legacy and his control. Fighting me threatens both. Uncle James nodded in agreement. But don't underestimate them, Emily. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. I looked back at the house one last time. I'm not underestimating them. I'm just not afraid of them anymore. 6 months later, I sat in the boardroom of Blackwell Industries, watching as the Environmental Compliance Committee presented their final report. The findings were sobering, years of cutting corners, of pushing boundaries, of prioritizing profit over people. But what mattered more was the path forward they outlined: comprehensive remediation, community investment, and fundamental changes to how the company operated. As the only board member who had consistently voted for the most aggressive reforms, I was used to being the outlier. But today was different. Today, several other board members were nodding along, asking thoughtful questions, engaging with the idea that Blackwell Industries could be both profitable and responsible. My father sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He had agreed to my terms that morning after the birthday party, signing the documents Marianne had prepared with a grim efficiency. No dramatics, no last-minute negotiations. Just a cold acceptance of the new reality. Matthew had been a different story. He'd refused to attend board meetings where I was present for the first 3 months, sending his proxy votes through his assistant. When he finally did show up, he spoke only when necessary and never directly to me. The brother I'd once shared ice cream with, built snow forts with, was now essentially a stranger. My mother had made awkward attempts at reconciliation, invitations to lunch, carefully impersonal birthday gifts, occasional texts asking about my day. I responded politely but maintained my distance. Some wounds needed more time to heal, if they ever would. Ms. Blackwell, would you like to add anything? The committee chair's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I straightened in my chair. I think the report speaks for itself. The question now is whether we as a board have the courage to fully implement these recommendations, even when they impact our short-term profits. My gaze swept around the table, lingering briefly on each face. This isn't just about avoiding fines or rehabilitating our public image. It's about who we want to be as a company moving forward. A few board members shifted uncomfortably, but others nodded. The chairman of the finance committee, an older man who had initially been one of my strongest opponents, spoke up. I've run the numbers. The initial investment is substantial, but the long-term benefits, reduced legal exposure, improved community relations, potential for new markets, they make business sense. I caught the slight twitch in my father's jaw. He hadn't expected his old friend to side with me. I move that we accept the committee's recommendations in full, I said, seizing the moment. I second, said the finance chairman, surprising everyone again. The vote was closer than I would have liked, 7-5 in favor, but it was enough. As the meeting adjourned, I gathered my papers, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Pride in what had been accomplished, lingering sadness for what had been lost, and something else, a quiet sense of purpose. My father approached as the room emptied, his steps measured, deliberate. Congratulations, he said, the word neutral, neither warm nor cold. It's not about winning, Dad, I replied. It's about doing what's right. He studied me for a moment, his expression shifting slightly. Your grandmother would be proud. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me to absorb the closest thing to approval he had offered in years. Outside the corporate tower, the autumn air was crisp, leaves swirling in eddies around my feet. I checked my watch, just enough time to make it to my next appointment. Not at Blackwell Industries, but at my own office, where my small but growing financial consultancy continued to thrive. I'd used part of my inheritance to expand, focusing on clients who shared my values, small businesses, nonprofits, individuals looking to invest ethically. The work was meaningful, the hours long but fulfilling. And unlike my role at Blackwell Industries, it was wholly mine, built on my own terms. As I drove across town, my phone buzzed with a text from Uncle James. How did it go? I smiled. Since the confrontation, he had become a steadfast presence in my life, part mentor, part friend, the family I had chosen rather than the one I was born into. We won the vote, I typed back at a red light. Heading to the office now. Still on for dinner tonight? The annual Blackwell Industries charity gala was that evening, my first official public appearance as a board member. Uncle James had offered to attend as my +1, knowing how daunting it would be to face the entire social circle that had witnessed my family's implosion 6 months earlier. Wouldn't miss it, came his prompt reply. Rented a tux and everything. At my office, Jess, now my office manager as well as my best friend, was waiting with coffee and an update on our newest client, a community development fund looking to invest in sustainable housing. How was the board meeting? She asked, following me into my office. Productive, I replied, setting down my bag. For once. She studied my face. You okay? I considered the question, looking around at the space I'd created, warm, welcoming, nothing like the cold grandeur of Blackwell Industries. On my desk sat a small framed photo of my grandmother Eleanor, her eyes twinkling with the same mischievous light I sometimes caught in my own reflection. I'm better than okay, I answered honestly. I'm free. That evening, As Uncle James and I walked into the gala, I felt the weight of dozens of curious eyes. The story of my confrontation with my family had circulated widely in our social circle, growing more dramatic with each retelling. I'd heard versions where I'd threatened my father with a gun, where I'd been secretly working with federal agents, where I'd blackmailed the entire board. The reality, a daughter standing up for herself, claiming what was rightfully hers, demanding better from the company that bore her name, was perhaps less sensational, but far more powerful. My mother intercepted us near the entrance, elegant as always in a designer gown. "Emily, James," she greeted, air-kissing our cheeks. "You both look wonderful." "Thank you, Helena," Uncle James replied warmly. "Magnificent event, as always." She beamed at the compliment, then turned to me with a slightly forced smile. "The guest list has been asking about you. The prodigal daughter returns, and as a board member no less." "Not prodigal, Mom," I corrected gently. "Just on my own path." Her smile faltered, then steadied. "Yes, well. Your father is by the main bar if you'd like to say hello." As she moved away to greet other guests, Uncle James squeezed my arm supportively. "Ready to face the lions?" I took a deep breath, scanning the crowded ballroom. Matthew stood with a group of executives, studiously avoiding looking in my direction. My father held court near the bar, his familiar commanding presence drawing people to him like moths to a flame. Board members, business associates, family friends, all the people who had witnessed my exclusion and said nothing. But I was no longer that lost, hurt young woman desperate for approval. I was Emily Blackwell, financial consultant, board member, advocate for change, and finally, at long last, the author of my own story. "I'm ready," I told Uncle James, stepping forward into the glittering crowd. "I've never been more ready in my life."